let's talk about dot work. It's a technique which can look super cool and effective when executed correctly, and likewise it's a technique which can completely ruin a tattoo if not applied right. Well, coming up in this video guys, I'm going to be showing you absolutely everything you need to know about dot work, and all it's going to cost you is 10 to 15 minutes of your time. Hey everyone, welcome to this video, and today's video is bursting with information all to do with dot work. Now, dot work's a really interesting subject because on the face of it, it's quite a simple technique to do, but it does have a lot of pitfalls if you approach it wrong. But don't worry guys, because I'm going to be covering all these in this video so you don't make any mistakes. So coming up in this video, I'm going to be discussing what dot work actually is. Then I'm going to show you the correct machine and needle setup. I'm going to show you the correct technique. Then I'm going to show you how to create a stencil ready for dot work. I'm going to be discussing a mistake commonly made which no one ever talks about and how to get around that mistake. And finally, we're going to be tattooing a practice pad and applying everything that we've learned in this video today onto a design. Now, like many of my other videos guys, I've constructed this in such a way where every block of information builds on the previous one. So to get the most out of it, I strongly recommend that you don't skip any of it. With all that said guys, let's not waste any more time and get straight into it. So let's start with the very basics and examine what dot work actually is. Well, it's exactly what it says on the tin. Dot work, simply put, is work made up of dots that can be used to create different patterns on the skin and can be applied in many different ways, like filling gaps, replacing shade, adding texture to designs, just to name a few. Now, there's lots of people that tend to get dot work confused with stipple shade or pepper shade, and this is because they can sometimes be very similar to each other, but there are actually some distinctive differences. The main difference being dot work will contain solid dots, with each dot being placed having the same saturation as the previous one. Now, stipple shade can have dots with varying degrees of saturation, with some being bold and strong and others being weak and small. Now, the things that determine whether you create strong, evenly saturated dots like dot work, or varying degrees of saturation and size dots like stipple shade, all come down to three main components. Those being machine speed, machine hit or bog, and technique. So that's all I'm going to talk about as far as stipple shading goes, because I've done a full in-depth video on this covering everything you need to know about this subject. If you haven't seen it already, I'll stick that card up on the screen, and if you click on that, you can watch it at the end of this video. So now we know what dot work actually is, let's take a look at the machine setup and needles. So to help you guys out a little bit more, I'm going to show you how to set up a coil machine and a rotary pen style machine for dot work. But whichever machine you do decide to use, you want it to be running at a speed of around 100 to 110 cycles per second. Now, if you don't know what cycles per second are, I do cover this super in depth in another video, and I'll stick that card up on the screen, and if you click it, you can watch it at the end of this video. But as a super quick recap, if the needle travels from its most upright position to its most downright position and back up again, this is considered as one cycle. So if the needle travelled down and up 10 times in 1 second, the machine would be considered to be running at 10 cycles per second, or 10 CPS. What we're aiming for with dot work is the needle to be travelling down and up between 100 and 110 cycles per second. And everyone does have a different preferred machine speed, but this is a rough ballpark figure to get you in the right sort of area. The next thing we need to set is the hit of the machine, so the machine hits hard. Similar to the hit that you'd have set up for a liner. You simply set the hit on a coil machine by increasing the volts, which in turn increases the force that the coils pull down the armature bar. I've also made a super in-depth video covering everything you need to know about the hit and the bog, so you can click that as well and also watch it at the end of this video if you haven't seen it already. Now, on lots of rotary machines like the Cheyenne pen, the hit is already preset, which means you can't set it. Now, if you do have a rotary machine or a pen style machine where you can adjust the hit, you want to be setting it so the machine hits hard. Next up we have needles. Now, the size of the needles used greatly depend on the design, but usually a small needle like a 003 round liner is perfect for precision dot work, though larger groupings like a 5 round liner, 7 round liner can also be used. So now that our machines are set up with the correct needles, let's get to the fun stuff and look at the correct technique. The actual technique for dot work is actually one of the easiest to learn. You simply need to lower your needle directly down into the skin, create a dot, and then lift it straight back out again, adopting an almost mechanical movement of lowering, lifting, and moving on. What you're ultimately aiming for is each dot being placed to be identical to the previous one in terms of shape, size, and saturation. The thing that you should never do is move the needle sideways when it touches down onto the skin, as this will cause irregular looking dots and even little lines. Now, a pro tip here for you guys is, when you first tattoo a Dotwork stencil, it's advisable to place some randomly spaced dots just to get a rough shape of the stencil committed to the skin. Now, by doing this, if you smudge or even lose your stencil during the tattoo, you'll still be able to complete the tattoo with ease, because you basically created a map of the stencil on the skin, which you can then work from. Now, I am going to delve a little deeper into this method a little further on in this video. So now let's move on to the next section, where I'm going to show you the best way to create a Dotwork stencil. So I'm going to be showing you 3 examples of Dotwork stencils. So for all 3 stencils, we're going to be using this design, which we've got loaded up on Photoshop. So with the first one, we're going to print it out on standard paper. Then we take a sheet of hectograph paper, we place it underneath our design and draw on top of it. Now, in my opinion, this is the best stencil for Dotwork, as this one gives the shape of the design, but also one that's clean, uncomplicated, and basic. The next method is one that I've seen people do in the past, and one that I definitely would not recommend. It's when the tattooist tries to replicate every single dot on the design to the stencil. Now, this can be super tedious, give you a weak end result. There's absolutely no need to try and replicate each individual dot, and ultimately you're going to be left with a stencil which can't really be used and an aching hand. The final method would be to print the stencil directly out if you've got an inkjet printer. For a design like this, I first darken it slightly on Photoshop to make the print out stronger, select the stencil printer, and then print it out. So now our pro tattooist is going to lay the first stencil, which is the basic strong one. And once it's laid on the skin, we just lay the paper towel on there, apply a little bit of pressure and lift off. And all that does is take any excess stencil from the skin, which is ultimately going to keep our work area even cleaner when we start to tattoo. Now, we will also be tattooing this stencil towards the end of the video, so stay tuned for that as well. So now let's take a look at what happens when our amateur tattooist lays the inkjet stencil. The application is exactly the same as the previous one, and on initial inspection, it looks good. Now, there's absolutely no need for this much detail, and no tattooist is going to pick out each individual dot from this stencil. With all this information from the stencil on the skin, things can turn really bad really quick. Let's say if ink splatters on the design or pulls on the design. So I've replicated it here in this example, and as soon as it's wiped, the stencil becomes a mess. So then you continue, and then you realise that the hand that you're tattoo machining has actually smudged the stencil further. So really quickly, the shape of the design becomes lost and you try to save it. And then maybe the client gets hot and sweats, and all of a sudden you're in a world of trouble with the tattoo you started and you've lost the stencil completely. So this is why I personally think a basic clean stencil is much more practical for a Dotwork design. So if you thought this scenario was bad enough, in this next section coming up, I'm going to show you a common mistake which people sometimes make even using a basic stencil, and also how to fix it. Just super quickly guys, if you are enjoying this video, it means the world to me if you take a second out right now, smash that like button to let me know you're liking it, and if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel. With all that said, let's move on to the next section. So let's say our amateur tattooist has laid their basic stencil like they've been told. They want to get all the basics committed to the skin in case the stencil gets smudged or sweated off. So they blitz around it as fast as they can before then going back to fill in all the details. The mistake that's been made here is the fact that they've been overcautious and edged the complete outline of the stencil. If you take a look at our reference image, it actually has feathered edges towards the upper parts of the design. But now the amateur tattooist has overdone it, edging everything on the stencil, we can now never achieve that delicate look that our reference image has. So although the completed tattoo does resemble the reference image, the lack of finesse gives it an overall amateur look. So in this final section coming up, we're going to tattoo this design again, but we're going to apply the method which we learned in the techniques section of this video and only commit the minimum amount of information to the tattoo. By doing this, we're going to keep our tattoo design safe on the skin if we lose the stencil, but also be able to give the tattoo a more polished, finished look which resembles the original reference image. So once again, I'm going to lay this nice basic readable Dotwork stencil onto the practice skin. I'm obviously going to be speeding this video up to get through the design, but I will be slowing it down in selected places so you can see where I'm actually placing minimal amounts of information just to get that stencil committed to the skin. As you can see, where I go towards the edges of the design, I'm placing very spaced out dots that show me where the end of the design is and where the sides of the designs are, without overpowering it with information. So now I've got this basic information committed to the skin, you can get into the fun zone, and just to show you how fail-safe this is, I'm going to completely remove the stencil from the practice skin, but I'll still be able to confidently continue with the tattoo and get a nice polished finish on it as well. Remembering what I said about Dotwork, to achieve the feathered look, it's not about making the dots lighter in saturation the more feathered it goes. It's simply creating an illusion of this, and you create this illusion by compacting dots tightly together for a denser look and spacing them out for a more feathered look. And as we get to the end of the tattoo now, you can see even though we completely lost our stencil near the beginning of the tattoo, we've been effectively able to complete it with no issues at all. And in stark contrast to this, if we lay this now side by side, the professional one against the amateur one, you can see what a massive difference it makes to the overall result by adopting the technique where you apply minimal information to the design at the beginning of the tattoo. Thank you so much for watching this video, guys, and if you did like it, it means a great deal to me. If you take a second out right now, smash that like button, and it also lets me know what you guys are liking and where to steer the channel for future videos. Don't forget to drop your comments in the box below. I always enjoy reading your comments and I try my absolute best to reply to each and every one of yours. Remember to subscribe to the channel. If you've already subscribed, don't forget to click that notification bell and you'll stay up to date with all my latest videos. With all that said, guys, thank you so much for watching and I'll see you in the next one.